tiny flame is enough to dispel the night. Elspeth, flavor text of Reprisal. After the mending of Dominaria, the power of planeswalkers was greatly diminished, and a new breed of planeswalkers would be born. No longer godlike entities with reality-shattering powers, these Neowalkers, as some call them, were merely unique individuals with the ability to travel between worlds. This did not mean that these new walkers were not powerful. In fact, many among them could be considered among the mightiest characters ever introduced in the Magic story. Potent pyromancers, crafty mind mages, and shamans with dominion over the beasts of the world have all come forward in the story. Many of these characters are more compelling than previous walkers, with grand goals or plans in store for the multiverse. But one of the most interesting and powerful planeswalkers to appear after the mending was a humble knight whose sole desire in life was to have a home she could call her own, and her name was Elspeth Tyrell. Elspeth's life begins on a world held within the iron grip of the Phyrexians. She and many others were prisoners who existed for the sole purpose of being tortured. At the age of 13, Elspeth's latent planeswalker spark would ignite, hurling her across the blind eternities to the distant world of Theros. On this new world, she meets with a young boy, Daxos, and the two are witness to a titanic battle between gods. Perforos, the Theros god of the Forge, was locked in combat with the sun god Heliod, who claimed himself lord of the Pantheon and greatest of the gods. During their clash, a sword forged by Perforos would be thrown from Nyx, and Elspeth retrieved the weapon before planeswalking away once again. The young planeswalker would arrive on the shard of Alara known as Bant, and here she would stay for some time. Elspeth settled into the nation of Valeron, leaving her old life behind as a secret she shared with no one. At the age of 17, she began training as a squire, and within a short 3 years, she would become one of the youngest ever knights of Bant. In this time, the core edicts of the Knight's Code of Bant were drilled into her. She repressed her own fantastic power in favor of a more humble position as a knight, relying on her blade rather than her own innate might. But Bant was just one shard of a greater world, a world that wanted to be whole once again. When the conflicts of Alara began, Elspeth would encounter a wounded Leonin planeswalker, a Johnny Goldmane. After nursing him back to full health, the knight attempted to convince Ajani to stay with her on Bant, but his own quest for vengeance caused him to reject her offer. However, before leaving, the Leonin warned Elspeth of the greater conflict to come. When the shards of Alara began to merge together, they did not do so gently. Nicol Bolas, an elder dragon planeswalker, was hoping to use the Alaran conflicts to increase his own powers. He would have his agents spread across the 5 shards, fester conflict, and prepare each individual plane for war. In doing so, he aimed to increase the power of the Alaran Maelstrom to further strengthen himself. The individual worlds formed by the Sundering would overlay with one another to cause uneven, jagged incursion zones. Elspeth, along with her squire, Aran, would encounter one such incursion zone originating from the horrid world of Grixis, and would in turn return to the castle they were stationed at to mount a defense. In the ensuing conflict, Aran would lose his life to the Grixis forces, and Elspeth was pushed to her limits as a knight. She would unleash her full power as a planeswalker, eradicating the enemies at the castle and simultaneously reviving her squire. Her Bant allies would see this as a divine power, looking on her with the same admiration they would an angel. But for Elspeth, all she could feel was shame, as she had cast aside the knightly code of Bant in using her powers, and she believed her actions betrayed the world she fought so hard to protect. Despite her grief, she would go on to assist the Knight General Rafik, one of the greatest heroes of Bant, at the apex of the Conflux War. Here, she assisted in the defeat and destruction of Malfagor, a demonic dragon and one of Nicobolas's greatest servants. Despite this great victory, Elspeth's feelings of shame were so great that when the conflict finished and Alara was reformed once again, she would planeswalk away, never to return. Elspeth ended up in Urborg on Dominaria, and here she sated her feelings of guilt and anguish by partaking in pit fights once popular with Dominaria's cabal. It was during one such fight that she landed a blow on one of her opponents, revealing to her the symbol of the Phyrexians on his arm. Enraged, Elspeth sought to slay her opponent, but the timely intervention of Ajani stayed her hand. The Leonin attempted to convince Elspeth to return to Bant, to help keep the peace and aid the mending world, but she would not be convinced. Though saddened, Ajani still gifted Elspeth her old armor before departing once again. Later, her opponent, the planeswalker Koth, revealed himself to be from the ailing world of Mirrodin, and together the two sought out the artificer Venser. When they found him, the pair was shocked to find Venser modifying an ancient Phyrexian ship, intending to transform it into a machine capable of interplanar travel. In a rage, Koth would encase the Sojourner's head in stone and force him to planeswalk to Mirrodin. Elspeth, though hesitant, followed after them. On Mirrodin, the trio of planeswalkers set out to find Karn, an old friend of Venser's and the one who crafted the artificial world in the first place. After the mending and the loss of his spark, Karn had begun to succumb to the Phyrexian oil that lay dormant within him. The silver golem had been corrupted by the oil, and in turn corrupted his own creation. Wave after wave of Phyrexians poured out of the plane's inner layers, and the native Mirrans are besieged by endless horrors seeking to convert the world into a Phyrexian hellscape. On this adventure, Elspeth, Koth, and Venser would encounter and aid the Mirran resistance, travel and discuss the ailing world, and free a young girl, Melira, who displayed a hope for the future in her natural immunity to the Phyrexian oil. All the while, Elspeth proved to be an invaluable asset to the group, as her raw power proved to be absolutely devastating to even some of the most nightmarish Phyrexians. Eventually, the three would make their way into the depths of the Metal World. After a battle against Tezzeret, an agent of Nicobolas, as well as Glissa, the former savior of Mirrodin, now corrupted entirely by Phyrexia, the three would at last meet with Karn, now known as the Father of Machines. The Golem, grafted to his metal throne, was caught in a battle within his own mind, desperate to fight off his own madness. This was a battle he was losing, as the Phyrexian oil had already corrupted him beyond repair. It was in this moment of despair that Venser, who revealed that he was already dying, would sacrifice his own life to transfer his spark into Karn, purging the Phyrexian corruption from his old friend. Liberated, Karn would ally himself with Elspeth and Koth in battling against the Phyrexian forces. But it was not a war that could be won. In a battle sometime later, in the tunnels of the world, Koth and Elspeth would be surrounded on all sides by an overwhelming amount of enemy forces. Koth would use his geomancy to attempt to force Elspeth to flee the metal world before he activated a powerful spell bomb. In the ensuing brawl that broke out, Elspeth was grievously wounded when a Phyrexian obliterator would shove two of its blades into her stomach, and she planeswalked away, half-conscious as the room exploded around her. Elspeth would end up back on the very first world she planeswalked to, the world of gods and monsters, Theros. After recovering from her wounds, Elspeth journeyed to the city of Akros, to the temple of the sun god Heliod, in an attempt to learn more about the deities of this world. But Heliod recognized the sword she carried with her, the sword used years ago by Perforos in their battle, and attempted to strike the knight down. To Heliod's surprise, however, Elspeth's own innate powers reflexively repelled the strikes of the supposed mightiest god. Heliod quickly regained his composure and used his magic to transform Elspeth's sword into Godsend, a blessed weapon, and commanded her to travel to his main temple. But news of the blade's return to Theros spread quickly to the other gods, and to Xenagos, a fellow planeswalker with dark schemes for the world. The satyr sought to ascend to divinity, and he incited the gods to seek out the blades for themselves. Elspeth's journey would have her challenged by the monstrous servants of several gods, but Krufix, the god of secrets and time, would enact the silence. This decree forced all of Theros' gods back into the demiplane of Nyx for a time, where they would be unable to interfere with mortal affairs and cause undue damage to the world. In this way, without the interference of the gods, Xenagos' plans could truly begin. At the gates of Meletis, Elspeth, as well as Daxos, the boy she met with so long ago, would battle against and slay the monstrous Hydra, Polukranos. In doing so, Elspeth's fame traveled far and wide among the mortals of the world, and Xenagos' plan came even closer to fruition. Elspeth would spend months on Theros after this, learning the teachings of Heliod, as well as growing closer to Daxos. But her calm life was disturbed by news of an army of Minotaurs set to besiege the city of Akros. When they arrived, the Queen Cymede told them of a satyr that wished to speak with Elspeth. Xenagos, held in a cell, told the Sun's champion of his plans to defeat the Minotaur army, a plan that succeeded flawlessly. In the celebration that followed, Elspeth and Daxos would realize their love for one another, but Xenagos weaved his magic, besieging Elspeth's mind with a nightmare born from her deepest fears, causing her to lash out and kill Daxos. As this happened, Xenagos also supplanted the revelry taking place and used its energy to finally trigger his own ascension into godhood. Heliod, furious, would blame Elspeth for the death of Daxos and for Xenagos' newfound divinity, and the knight fled into the wilderness in fear for her life. Here she would meet up with the Leonin tribe and once again encounter a Johnny who had been searching for her all this time. The two traveled together to seek revenge on Xenagos, and made their way to the Temple of Krufix at the very edge of the world. Along the way, the two were ferried across the sea by the merfolk planeswalker Kiora, who was masquerading as a legendary Therosian figure for her own goals. The trio was stopped by Thassa, god of the sea, who sent Ajani and Elspeth on their way, aware of their quest, before turning to face Kiora in battle herself. At the edge of the world, Elspeth will be granted access to Nyx, but only if she first passed the trial of a god. Ajani urged his friend to take the ordeal of Thassa, who promised an easy path into the realm of the gods, but Elspeth turned away, and instead took the ordeal of Erebos, the Lord of the Dead. She would experience a dream, an illusion of a better life, a more pleasant existence, where she was back on Bant with a husband she never knew, and 2 children she never had. Though tempted to stay, Elspeth endured and passed the test, refusing to remain in the illusion, and so past Erebos' ordeal. Now in Nyx, the starry landscape of the gods, Elspeth, the sun's champion, would do battle with Xenagos, the usurper. And while her enemy was mighty indeed, even a god was no match for Elspeth at her peak. She plunged her weapon, Godsend, into Xenagos' chest, which caused an arrowhead shot by Nylea, the god of the hunt, to burst and destroy Xenagos from within, eradicating him completely. As she tasted her final victory, Elspeth called out to Erebos and named her prize for her ordeal. She would trade her own life for that of Daxos, much to the protest of Ajani. The two, exhausted from their battle, made their way back to the entrance of the mortal world, but Heliod found them fast and took Elspeth's weapon, using it to deliver her a mortal blow. Ajani would pull Elspeth over into the mortal realm where she perished, descending into the underworld, where the next chapter of her story will likely begin. Elspeth has been featured on 3 Planeswalker cards so far, and she has many cards associated with her. With a return to Theros on the horizon, and with our knight almost guaranteed to appear in the set, I decided that now was a good time to discuss the history of one of Magic's most powerful, yet humble characters. Here's hoping that the next time we see her, the multiverse is a bit kinder to our knight errant. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like or subscribing, and I'll always be grateful if you were to share my videos with your friends. If you hit that little bell notification, you'll be notified when new videos are uploaded to my channel. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll have an early idea of what my next video will be about. Thank you, and have a good day.